Today's video is sponsored by Hunter Killer. So in some recent videos, you might have heard me raving about Hunter Killer. If not, let me clue you in. Hunter Killer is a fantastic subscription box that's perfect for all you true crime fans that get a kick out of my content. Each box comes with a story, a game, which places players in the role of detective and challenges you with solving an intricate homicide investigation. It's crazy, dark fun, and a unique way to spend an evening. Each box comes filled to the brim with case files, clues, ciphers, props, puzzles, and other interesting goodies, which you'll use to catch the elusive killer. All the pieces are highly detailed and authentic looking, so you can truly get immersed in whatever mystery you're playing through, and feel like a real Sherlock Holmes. Because of the way it's designed, Hunter Killer is a great game to play by yourself, but for me, the best way to experience it is with other people. Whether you're socializing with friends or family, it's always amusing to bounce ideas off each other and collaborate to catch the murderer in each story. My girlfriend and I love having our friends over to crack a mystery over a few drinks, and we always have a blast racking our brains figuring out who blew somebody else's out. So if cracking open a cold one and cracking a cold case sounds like your idea of a fun night in, head on over to hunterkiller.com/lazymasquerade. Make sure to use promo code LAZY to get 20% off your first box, and find out if you have what it takes to solve the case waiting for you inside. Again, take advantage of that devilish 20% discount by going to hunterkiller.com/lazymasquerade and using promo code LAZY. Happy hunting, detective. He was born by the river in a little tent, and just like that river, he'd been running ever since. Sam Cooke was at the peak of his career in the late 50s, early 60s, but I'm sure even the youngsters among you are at least familiar with his biggest hits. For example, A Change Is Gonna Come, a song that's been covered countless times. What you might not be familiar with, though, is the uncertainty surrounding his death at the age of 33, when he was shot and killed in a California motel, apparently in self-defense. Or was he? The mystery surrounding this case isn't who pulled the trigger, but more to do with the circumstances of his killing, the reason behind it, and if it really happened the way the official report alleges. Let's start from the beginning. Known as the King of Soul, and credited by many as the pioneer of soul music, Sam Cooke's work contributed to the rise of other superstars like Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, and Marvin Gaye. His career came to a literal dead end on the night of December 11th, 1964, when police were summoned to the Hacienda Motel in LA. They were responding to two separate reports of a kidnapping and a shooting. When they arrived, they found Sam Cooke on the floor with a hole in his chest. He'd been shot through the heart by the motel's manager, Bertha Franklin. She claimed to have killed him in self-defense, but Cooke's acquaintances quickly disputed this. This case is very much a he said, she said mystery, but with a few interesting clues mixed in, which might lead us to the correct answer. Here's the motel manager's version of events. According to Bertha Franklin, Cooke came banging on her office door in the middle of the night, shouting, "Where's the girl?" Bertha shouted back that she was alone in the office, and that whoever he was looking for, she wasn't in there with her. In a rage, Cooke then burst into the office, wearing nothing except for one shoe and a sport jacket. He then began to grapple with Bertha. She was able to break away from him, and ran to retrieve her firearm from the top of the TV she was watching. She fired 3 rounds, missing twice. One of the slugs hit its target though, Cooke's chest. He exclaimed, "Lady, you shot me," more astonished than angry. He then charged at her one final time, at which point she hit him over the head with a broom. He finally collapsed to the floor and died from his chest wound. Well, that's the story that Bertha told the investigators. So, who was this mystery woman that Cooke was looking for, and why was he so angry and adamant to find her? Well, Cooke had apparently arrived at the motel that evening, accompanied by a 22-year-old woman named Alicia Boya. According to Alicia, she and Cooke met at a nightclub that evening, and Cooke had agreed to drive her home. Instead of doing so, she said he instead drove her to the Hacienda Motel and began to forcefully undress her in the room he had just paid for. Fearing for her safety, she scooped up her own clothes, and accidentally scooped up Cooke's as well, and ran outside. She then made her way to a payphone and reported what had just happened to her. So, sounds pretty cut and dry, right? Sam Cooke was extremely talented and famous, but he also had a dark side, and got what he deserved in the end after trying to have his way with an unconsenting woman. Well, maybe. But Elisa's story has been called into question by many people, as her version of events don't seem to line up with reality. Her account contains numerous inconsistencies. For example, she claims to have met Sam at the club, but was seen with him at a place called Martoni's Restaurant much earlier in the evening. Everyone had their eyes on Cooke at the restaurant. He was, after all, a dashing celebrity. According to eyewitnesses, he was seen waving around thousands of dollars and buying all of his friends drinks. Those who were eavesdropping into his conversation said that Elisa willingly went to the motel with him. When they arrived at the motel, Cooke left Elisa in the car while he went to book the room, which would have given her plenty of time to escape if she felt like she was in danger or had been forced to go there against her will. Not to mention, Elisa herself was somewhat of a sordid character, and was the kind of girl who didn't mind selling her time and her body, if you get my meaning. In fact, she was arrested for doing so only 1 month after Cooke's demise, busted by an undercover officer. Given her history, and the fact that Cooke was known to carry large amounts of cash on him, it's been theorized that he hired her services, and that when they reached the motel, she actually slipped out with Cooke's clothing intentionally to stop him from chasing her, and to take all of the money inside his pockets. Perhaps Cooke's fury wasn't because a victim had escaped his clutches, but because he'd just been robbed. His anger was likely exacerbated by all of the drinks he had had at dinner. Still, if he really was grappling with Bertha, the manager, and if she really did fear for her own life, then that all doesn't matter, right? She was still justified in shooting him. The plot thickens again. Cooke's friends examined his body at the morgue, and found that it was in far worse shape than Bertha's story would have suggested. According to Bertha, an ex-madam with a criminal history of her own by the way, she simply shot Cooke and then hit him on the head with a broomstick. However, when legendary singer Etta James viewed her friend's remains, she was shocked to find Cooke's head almost detached from his torso, his hands broken and crushed, and his nose mangled. These injuries were far beyond the official account. In her mind, and in the minds of many of his friends, family and supporters, Cooke wasn't slain by the manager alone, and certainly not in the way that her story presented. Some have even speculated that Cooke was intentionally murdered by his manager, Alan Klein, who owned all of the rights to Cooke's recordings. As an interesting side note, Elisa Boyer, the woman Cooke took to the motel that fateful night, was later charged with the murder of her own boyfriend, adding fuel to the conspiracy fire that Cooke was indeed the victim of some sort of plan to take him out. In spite of that, no concrete evidence supporting a criminal conspiracy has been presented to date, and Cooke's demise remains listed as a case of self-defense. So, that's the surprising mystery surrounding the death of the King of Soul. Did it really happen the way the official report claims, or is there more to this story than people are admitting to? Because of Sam Cooke's legendary status, this mystery will likely continue to captivate music fans for generations to come. Easily the most talked about deaths in hip-hop, the unsolved murders of both Tupac and the notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie Smalls, remain shrouded in mystery, despite the pair of them being some of the biggest artists back in the day. I figured it best to cover these cases together, since people usually discuss them as a pair, and they are, in many ways, connected. Dominating the scene back in the 90s, Tupac and Biggie were the young faces of a new generation of hip-hop, Tupac representing the West Coast, and Biggie the East. Divisions between the two ran deeper than just geography, however, and despite starting off their careers as friends, a deadly rivalry soon developed between the two superstars. Their feud extended to their respective record labels too. Headed by Suge Knight, Tupac, along with other famous rappers like Snoop Dogg, were artists of Death Row Records. Biggie's label was Bad Boy Records, which was founded by his close friend and producer, Puffy, aka Diddy, aka Puff Daddy, aka a whole bunch of other names. As a result of this tension, Biggie and Tupac had their fair share of altercations during their time in the limelight. They made diss tracks about each other, and made media headlines whenever they'd insult each other or call each other out for one perceived slight or another. This all escalated into a literal coastal rap war, and originated because Tupac was shot in 1994. He survived this, but always suspected that Biggie and Puffy were somehow behind his shooting. They always denied any involvement, but shortly after the shooting, Biggie released a song called Who Shot Ya? He claimed this was merely a coincidence, which, given the subject matter he usually rapped about, is believable. Tupac wasn't buying it though, and thus a friendship was broken. Pac responded with his own threatening tracks, such as Hit 'Em Up, which alluded to him sleeping with Biggie's wife and planning his revenge on him. All that's to say, these two rap icons viewed each other as more than just simple competition, and they both had more than their fair share of enemies. It was the night of September 7th, 1996, the day Tupac met a grisly fate. It was 11:15 PM in Las Vegas. Tupac had just attended a boxing match between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon. He and his manager, Suge Knight, were now on their way to the 662 Club. While stopped at a red light at East Flamingo Road and Covell Lane, another car pulled up beside Tupac's. The window rolled down, and a hail of bullets came screeching into Pac's vehicle, hitting him 4 times. Once in the arm, once in the thigh, and twice in the chest. Shards of glass hit Suge Knight in the face. Tupac was rushed to hospital, but died 6 days later from his injuries at the age of 25. He was cremated, and his friends smoked his ashes. To this day, nobody knows who pulled the trigger that night, though there are a few leading theories. Firstly, it's no surprise that both the Notorious B.I.G. and Puffy were suspects in the case. Biggie definitely had a pretty, big motive to take out his main rival. There are even multiple reports of Puffy saying how he'd pay someone $1 million to do so. Not to mention, whenever interviewed about the subject, Puffy often gives weird responses, even to this day, saying things like, "Any negative things that I've done? That's the devil at work. At the end of the day, the devil's a liar, and I can't feed into negativity or anything like that when I'm in control of myself. So I've got to always be trying to strive and get better." What on earth's that supposed to mean? Some other people instead think that Tupac's boss and driver that evening, Suge Knight, was behind the hit. Suge is pretty much an evil person, who ran his record label like a mafia boss, and is currently in prison for a different murder charge, and some suggest that he may have been luring Tupac to his demise that night. Tupac had recently had a falling out with Suge over unpaid royalties, and was planning on leaving Death Row Records. If he were to leave, Suge would have taken a massive financial hit, and would have had to pay Tupac a huge amount of money. For a guy like Suge, that certainly would have been incentive enough to take Tupac out of the picture. Suge even had a bunch of officers on his payroll, so likely would have been able to cover up his involvement and keep the case from being solved. The most compelling theory, perhaps, is that a man named Orlando Anderson shot him. Earlier that night, Tupac had gotten into a physical fight with Orlando. Word got out that Orlando had tried to steal a death row necklace from one of Tupac's friends. After one of his entourage pointed Orlando out, Tupac approached him and punched him in the face. This was followed by a beating, which was all captured on CCTV. In 2006, Detective Greg Cadding began investigating the murder of Tupac to try and close the cold case, and came to the conclusion that Orlando likely followed and shot him. Orlando's uncle and one of his suspected accomplices that night, Keefe D, confessed on tape that they were both paid by Puffy to do the hit, and that Orlando getting punched by Tupac that night was just a complete coincidence. Both Orlando and Keefe D had worked security for Puffy in the past, so it's certainly plausible, and you can even listen to Keefe discussing the events that night on YouTube. In the interview, he states, "Puffy was like, I want to get rid of them dudes. I was like, man, we'll wipe their ass out quick. It's nothing. Consider it done." It remains unclear just how truthful that confession is, and whether Puffy really did have a hand in Pac's demise. Why he'd confessed to shooting Tupac on tape remains unknown. Then again, why he'd lie about doing so also remains unknown. It's certainly highly suspicious either way. As to why Tupac's death still remains unsolved in spite of his massive popularity, perhaps there's a dark reason behind that. Las Vegas authorities told LAPD detective Russell Poole that the main reason why they would never solve this case is that the politicians didn't want them to. They said that the powers that be let them know that the city didn't need an OJ-style circus. The rabbit hole deepens. Now, on a related note. As mentioned, Biggie Smalls, or the notorious B.I.G., was the seminal East Coast rapper in the 90s. Now with Tupac out of the picture, it was safe to say that he was the #1 rapper in the entire world. But heavy lies the crown, and just 6 months after Tupac's killing, Biggie himself met the same fate. And, just like his main rival, it remains unknown who carried out that hit. In March 1997, Biggie was in California, promoting his upcoming album and shooting a music video for his future single, Hypnotize. In an interview, he confessed to hiring a security detail while in the West Coast state, since he feared for his safety while he was there. On March 8th, he attended an awards show after-party. At 12:45 AM on March 9th, the party had been shut down, and he and his entourage were driving back to their hotel. Again, while stopped at a red light, an unidentified man in a blue suit and bow tie pulled up beside Biggie's vehicle and opened fire on him. Just like Tupac, he was hit 4 times. He passed away 30 minutes later at the hospital at the age of 24. Only one of the shots was fatal, and it entered through his right hip and struck his colon, liver, heart, and left lung before stopping in his left shoulder. He never stood a chance. 16 days after Biggie's killing, his album, Life After Death, was posthumously released, surpassing even the success of his prophetically named debut album, Ready to Die. To this day, his popularity and influence persists, and just a few days ago, the $6 plastic crown he wore in his last ever photo shoot sold at auction for $600,000. Given the timing and the animosity between the two, it seems likely that Biggie's slaying was some sort of revenge for Tupac's. There are many who assert that Suge Knight, again, was responsible for ordering Biggie's death. They suggest that he conspired with David Mack, an LAPD officer, to have the B.I.G. slain so as to make both his and Tupac's death seem like the result of a bi-coastal rap feud. This could have been for revenge, or just for business. Suge had made a boatload of cash from fueling the rivalry between the two rappers, and even more after Tupac's death, what with album sales, media coverage, and not having to pay him for the money he owed him. Perhaps he saw slaying Biggie as a business opportunity. Detective Greg Cadding, the same guy who worked the Tupac case, believes that a man named Wardell Faust was behind the trigger. Wardell Faust himself would later be shot in the back in 2003 while riding his motorcycle. Coincidence? What baffles my mind was that both rappers were being watched by the FBI at the time of their grisly ends, yet conveniently, nobody saw anything in either case. I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories, but that's a little curious to say the least, right? Ultimately, we don't know for sure who killed Biggie or Tupac, though some of the theories are very persuasive. Some theories less so, like the theory that Tupac faked his own death due to the fact that many of the lyrics in his posthumously released songs allude to events that happened after his death. Dave Chappelle even parodied this in one of his skits called I Wrote This Song in '94, a personal favourite of mine. Still, I think it's a little unlikely that Pac's living it up with a Bahama mama on some secret island somewhere with Elvis and Cobain and other dead celebrities that people claim are still alive and kicking. Whatever your opinions about Tupac and Biggie and their music, it's safe to say that these are two of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in music history, and ones that have kept millions of fans guessing for decades. With so many supporters of their work, it's safe to say that when it comes to speculation over these two cases, the sky's the limit. Philip Taylor Kramer, referred to mostly by his middle name, was the bass player of the American rock band I Am Butterfly back in the mid to late 70s. Standing at 6 feet 5 inches, he was very much a gentle giant. I Am Butterfly released such albums as Scorching Beauty and Sun and Steel. The group never found much mainstream success though. In 1980, Taylor gave up on his music, and instead went on to obtain a degree in aerospace engineering. He ended up working as an engineer on the MX Missile Guidance System, a project for the US Department of Defense, and later in the computer industry on fractal compression, facial recognition systems, and advanced communications. Needless to say, he was a very smart guy. He got married to Jennifer, the love of his life, and the couple had children together. Tying both his lives in science and music together, Taylor co-founded Total Media Inc. with his business partner, Randy Jackson, brother of Michael Jackson. The pair developed data compression techniques for CD-ROMs. He had worked there until his sudden disappearance in 1995. On February 12th of that year, Taylor drove to LA International Airport to pick up a business associate and his wife. This guy, Greg Martini, was a principal investor in Taylor's company. Taylor arrived at the airport for the pickup and waited there for about 25 minutes, but then, strangely, got back in his car and drove off before he met Greg and his wife. He then called up his own wife, Jennifer, and told her that plans had changed and that he had a big surprise for her. He then also called up his former bandmate, Ron Bushy, and, in a distressed tone, simply said, "Bush, it's Taylor. I love you more than life itself." Then he hung up. He then phoned his wife again, saying that, "Whatever happens, I'll always be with you." Finally, he made a call to the authorities. In that final call, he said to them, "I'm going to end myself, and I want everyone to know O.J. Simpson is innocent." They did it. That last part was in reference to Taylor's latest project. He'd been tasked with analysing the authenticity of a videotape that the FBI and DEA had on O.J. Simpson. After loitering around the airport, he was never seen again, though he did make one final call to his family 16 days later. All he said was, "Hello, hello," before either hanging up or losing connection. Something happened during that time, either in his head or at the terminal, that made him turn away, said former LA officer Chuck Carter, who worked on Taylor's case. And I'll tell you, I haven't a clue. The guy didn't have an enemy. The guy was a dedicated family man. I checked him out. Several alleged sightings of Taylor were reported in the weeks and months after he disappeared, and numerous conspiracies started flying around. There was even speculation that he was abducted by America's enemies. His case was discussed on The Oprah Winfrey Show, America's Most Wanted, The Unexplained, and Unsolved Mysteries, so it definitely got a lot of coverage. For 4 years, his well-being remained unknown. Then, on May 29th, 1999, more than 4 years after he disappeared, Taylor's minivan was discovered at the bottom of Decker Canyon near Malibu. Inside were his skeletal remains. You might be thinking, well, that's an open and shut case. He'd been working non-stop for the past couple of weeks, running on barely any sleep, and he had just told the authorities he wanted to end it all. He simply did what he said he was going to do. Sure, maybe, but his father doesn't agree with that theory. Taylor had been working on a revolutionary project at the time he disappeared, a method of transporting information and matter through space. Taylor had told me a long time before there were people bothering him, said his father. They wanted what he was doing, and some of them were threatening him. He once told me that if I ever say I'm going to kill myself, don't you believe it one bit. I'll be needing help. That quote from his father sent speculation into overdrive, and leaves many people wondering if Taylor really did take his own life that day. What was with his strange, paranoid behavior when he vanished? Was someone really after him, or was the stress from the job simply too much for him to bear anymore? Now that investigators are no longer looking into his case, speculation seems likely to persist. So I've saved this one until last, because as I was working on the script for this video, this particular mystery may have actually been solved. Nothing's concrete yet though, so at this precise moment in time, it's still considered an ongoing, unsolved mystery. Jason Mizell, better known as Jam Master Jay, was 1/3 of the famous hip-hop group Run DMC. They were one of the biggest acts of the 1980s, and had a string of hits under their belt. What I personally was unaware of was that back on October 30th, 2002, the Jam Master himself was murdered in cold blood, and the identity and motive of his killers remained a mystery until, well, very recently. Let's get into it. At around 6 PM, Jay arrived at his 24/7 studio in Queens, New York, to work on a track for Rusty Waters, a duo signed to his label. He played a few games of Madden with his friend, Tony Rincon, while he waited for Rusty Waters to arrive. Also present was his assistant, Lydia High. Not long after, Randy Allen, one of the members of Rusty Waters, arrived at the studio with his friend Mike B. Rankin and Jay went into another room to discuss some demo tapes. At 7:30, Rankin recalls hearing footsteps enter the studio. Two men walked past Lydia's desk, told her to get to the ground, and then entered the private room with Jay and Rankin. Jay apparently slapped hands and embraced one of the men, suggesting he knew the guy. When Jay turned his back moments later, one of the men opened fire, hitting Rankin in the leg and Jam Master Jay in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Neither Rankin, his friend Mike B, Jay's friend Tony, or his assistant Lydia saw who fired the weapon. Unfortunately, they got away scot-free. For years, a number of theories were thrown around about who had taken Jay's life. People started discussing possible motives, including a debt owed to a neighborhood acquaintance, disputes over music publishing advances. Some people even started saying that Jay was taken out because he took 50 Cent on as a protege. This was back when 50 was added to a music industry blacklist by Kenneth Supreme McGriff and his associates. It seemed odd that so many people were at the studio when the hit took place, and yet nobody knew the identity of Jay's killers. Rumors started spreading that one of Jay's friends must have been involved somehow. How could nobody have seen the faces of the perps, or have any idea about who was involved? Well, as of last month, it looks like we might finally have our answer. It was 50 Cent all along. No, not really. On August 17th, the authorities announced that they'd indicted two men in connection with Jam Master Jay's case. Ronald Washington and Carl Jordan, Jr., the former already in prison for a different offense. Turns out that they went to Jay's studio that day to steal some illicit substances they knew he was hiding there. Jay had been struggling financially at the time, and his wife even had to get a job at Banana Republic to help pay the bills. Not something you'd expect, given Jay's success with Run DMC. Jay had told Ronald Washington that he wouldn't be involved with the distribution of the product he had, and so, whether out of greed or anger, or both, Washington and his buddy came to confront Jay. Carl Jordan is apparently the one who pulled the trigger. Still, take all of that with a pinch of salt, since these two guys haven't actually had their day in court, and the case can't be marked as solved yet. As a side note, Washington is also a suspect in the murder of Stretch, a rapper and close friend of Tupac. So I guess we've come full circle in this video. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, this was volume 2 actually, of a video I made years and years ago actually, the one with Elvis Presley and Elliott Smith in. But I figured enough time had passed, it was probably time to cover some other mysteries in music, you know. I mean, who isn't a fan of music, right? I'd like to say a huge thank you to Robin Mickelson for making the thumbnail for this video. He's been doing a lot of work for me recently, and he always knocks it out of the park, so make sure to check him out by the links down below in the description. Also, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters on YouTube and on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Crawford K McDonald, Monica Mendoza, Charles Wilson, Tom King, Phantom Knight, Alicia L, Alex Greensall, Philip Westra, Procupidine Natter, Gina Valera, Martin Vatland, AnimeWimp, Sarah Ramirez, Sloane Crawford, Nadine, Kelly Rocco, Connor Louthan, Kelly Rocco again, Decaying Girl, Sieg, Carla, Infamous-senpapi, Alba Medrano, Silas Gheist, Azrael Warakai, Lord 210, TheOnlyDorita, Ricky Cohen Jr., Aura Dragon 1, Hungry and Hammered, Leonardo Martinez, and Maek Furnish. Thank you all so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. If you'd like to become a Patreon too, then you can do so by checking the link in the description, and you can see what exclusive perks I have for offer. Be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you. Follow me on social media, all that good jazz, and you'll be hearing from me again very, very soon. Until then guys, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.